The morning of the funeral was gray. The kind of gray that hangs over the earth like an old memory refusing to fade. A quiet fog rolled down from the distant hills, swallowing the village one breath at a time. The air was thick with sorrow, and even the birds that usually sang from the birch trees seemed to know that something sacred was about to take place. The church stood at the edge of the forest, a small, white building whose bell had not rung in months. Its walls carried the scent of rain and age, and the old wooden doors creaked softly in the wind. Inside, candles flickered along the pews, their weak flames trembling like the hearts of those gathered. They had come to mourn a child. Her name was Lila, a girl no older than 7, whose laughter had once been the sound that made this sleepy village feel alive. She had been found by the river 3 days earlier, her tiny hands pale as moonlight, her dress torn, her curls tangled in reeds. No one truly knew what had happened. The river was wild that week, swollen by storm and sorrow alike. And now, they had come to say goodbye. The coffin was small, heartbreakingly small, made of whitewood and lined with the kind of flowers Lila had once picked for her mother every spring. Wild daisies, pale lilies, and tiny forget-me-nots. Her mother sat in the front row, her face hidden in her hands, motionless, as though she too had turned to stone. The priest began to speak, soft words, hollow words, about heaven and peace and angels watching over little souls. The crowd bowed their heads, but few truly heard him. Their hearts were too heavy to carry meaning. Outside, the wind shifted. From beyond the cemetery, deep in the woods, came a low, haunting sound, a howl. It rose and fell, echoing against the hills, chilling the air. Heads turned, eyes met. A ripple of unease passed through the mourners. Wolves had not been seen near the village in years. Some whispered that the beasts had long vanished from these parts, driven off by men and fear alike. But the howl came again, closer this time. The priest hesitated, his words faltering. The bell above the church gave a single metallic groan, though no hand had touched it. And then, silence. For a moment, all sound vanished. The world seemed to stop breathing. The fog thickened at the edge of the graveyard, swirling like a curtain being drawn aside. From its depths emerged a shape, dark, broad, and moving with a slow, deliberate grace. The crowd gasped. The mother looked up. The priest stepped back, clutching his book. It was a wolf, massive, gray as storm clouds. Its fur glistened with dew, and its eyes, golden, burning, ancient, fixed upon the coffin. No one moved. The beast walked between the rows of graves. Silent but certain, as though it had walked this path before. The air seemed to bow around it, the fog parting at its steps. When it reached the little white coffin, it stopped. The world held its breath. The wolf lowered its head. For a heartbeat, it did nothing. Then, slowly, it placed one great paw upon the edge of the coffin lid. A faint sound escaped its throat, not a growl, not a snarl, but something closer to a cry. Low, aching, human. And then the impossible happened. The flowers that lined the coffin began to stir. Petals trembled, shifting in the still air. The whitewood creaked softly, a sound so delicate that at first, no one dared believe it was real. Then came another sound, faint, fragile, a breath. The mother's head snapped up. Another breath, shallow, trembling. Then, a cough. The priest dropped his book. The crowd surged forward, disbelief breaking into chaos. Someone screamed. Someone prayed. The wolf stepped back, its golden eyes glowing in the candlelight spilling from the chapel doors. The coffin lid moved, slowly, hesitantly, and a small hand appeared, pale but alive, clutching the edge. The mother's sob became a cry that shattered the silence of the graveyard. Lila sat up. Her eyes fluttered open, dazed and glassy. Her lips parted, trembling with confusion. She looked around, her breath visible in the cold air, then toward the wolf standing before her. For a long moment, they simply looked at one another, the child and the creature, life and mystery reflected in each other's gaze. The wolf took a single step forward, then bowed its head, low and reverent, before turning away. It vanished back into the fog. No one followed. No one dared. By the time the mother gathered her daughter into her arms, sobbing with a joy too raw to name, the wolf was gone. Only its paw prints remained in the frost-covered earth, larger than any wolf's should have been, glowing faintly as if touched by light. The priest would later swear that when he picked up his fallen book, the candle flames around them had steadied, burning taller, brighter. And though the villagers searched the forest for days after, they never found the creature again. But that night, beneath a sky full of stars, Lila woke from her deep sleep and whispered a single word, a word she said she heard when she opened her eyes inside the coffin. The days that followed the miracle were strange ones for the village. It was as though time itself hesitated, unsure whether to continue its ordinary rhythm or to linger in awe of what had taken place. People walked slower, spoke softer, and avoided looking too long at the forest that bordered the churchyard. There was something ancient breathing there now, something sacred, and none dared disturb it. The little girl, Lila, was alive. That truth alone was enough to make the villagers whisper, as though speaking it aloud might shatter the fragile gift they had been given. The doctor from the neighboring town examined her and found no wound, no illness, nothing to explain her death, or her return. Her heartbeat was steady, her lungs clear, her skin warm. Yet her eyes had changed. Once they had been the soft brown of honey. Now they glimmered faintly gold, the same haunting shade as the wolf that had appeared from the mist. When she looked at the world, it was as though she saw something beyond it, something deeper, older, wilder. Her mother tried not to notice. She tried to smile and feed her soup, to braid her hair, to tell her that everything was fine. But at night, when Lila dreamt, she would whisper in her sleep, strange words that made the candles flicker and the air hum. The villagers began to talk. Some said the child had been blessed. Others said she had been touched by something unnatural. There were those who believed the wolf was a divine messenger, and others who whispered darker tales, that it was the spirit of an ancient alpha, cursed and wandering, drawn to her for reasons beyond mortal knowing. And always, beyond the trees, eyes watched. The forest stood like a wall of shadow and whispering leaves. Its heart had always been feared, dense, untamed, echoing with the cries of unseen beasts. But now, a presence stirred there, moving unseen along the edges of the village. The shepherds saw glimpses at dusk, a massive shape pacing along the ridge. Hunters found pawprints the size of a man's hand near the river. Every night, when the fog rose and the moon lifted her pale face over the treetops, that same low, distant howl would rise, not threatening, but sorrowful, almost like a song. Lila would wake when she heard it. She would sit by the window, her little hands pressed to the glass, eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. Her mother would ask what she was doing. Lila would simply answer, "He's watching." Then she would smile, a small, calm smile, and return to bed. But there were moments, in the quiet between night and dawn, when her mother swore she heard something moving outside the house. A shadow sliding along the fence. Heavy footsteps in the frost. Once, she even found claw marks on the old wooden door, as though something enormous had rested its paw there for a moment before disappearing again. The townsfolk grew restless. Fear mingled with wonder, and suspicion began to spread. They came to the priest, demanding he bless the houses, sprinkle holy water along the forest path, drive out whatever spirit had claimed the girl. The priest hesitated, for though his faith was strong, he could not shake the image of that golden-eyed beast lowering its head in reverence at the child's coffin. He sensed no evil that day. Only sorrow, only purpose, and somewhere in that purpose lay a truth none of them yet understood. One evening, a storm gathered, fierce and sudden. Thunder rolled through the hills like a beast awakening. Rain lashed the rooftops, and lightning clawed at the sky. The mother barred the windows, whispered prayers, and held Lila close. The girl, however, seemed unafraid. She stared toward the forest with an expression far too calm for her age. And then, as thunder roared again, she whispered, "He's coming." At first, her mother thought she meant the storm. But then, through the noise of wind and rain, came another sound. Deep, rhythmic, steady, paws hitting earth. The wolf appeared at the edge of the clearing, drenched and enormous, his fur glistening with rain. Lightning flashed, revealing the gold in his eyes, the same gold that shimmered faintly in Lila's. He stopped just beyond the fence, his gaze fixed on the house. And then he did something unexpected. He bowed, slowly, gracefully, lowering his massive head as if before a queen. The child stepped toward the window. The glass trembled, as though recognizing an old friend. The wolf lifted his gaze, meeting hers. For an endless second, the storm seemed to fall silent. Then, in a single flash of light, the wolf vanished into the trees. But when morning came, and the villagers ventured out to see the damage left by the storm, they found something strange outside Lila's home. The fence had been torn down, not by rage, but by protection. A tree had fallen toward the house in the night, yet something had pushed it aside at the last second, leaving the home untouched. The priest saw it first, the marks in the mud, deep and clear. Pawprints again, enormous, deliberate, standing between the tree and the cottage like a shield. That day, no one dared speak ill of the beast. But from the shadows of the forest, the wolf watched. His eyes followed the little girl as she played, alive and smiling once more. To her, he was not a monster or a miracle. He was something she had always known, deep in the marrow of her small heart. He was the echo that had answered her last breath. He was the soul that had refused to let her cross the veil. He was the guardian. Long before the village ever existed, before roads or churches or names written on stones, there was a forest. It stretched across mountains and rivers, an endless sea of green and shadow. And within that ancient forest lived a people who walked between two worlds, the realm of men and the realm of beasts. They were called the Moonborn, children of the old magic, bound by blood to the light of the moon and the spirit of the wolf. They were warriors, protectors, guardians of balance. But power, like all things sacred, is never safe from envy. The story of the wolf that stopped the funeral began there, centuries before Lila ever breathed her first breath. He was once known as Kale, the firstborn of the Alpha King of the Moonborn clans. His heart was fierce, loyal, and pure, devoted to protecting both his people and the fragile humans who lived near the forest's edge. The Moonborn were not monsters then, they were guardians of the old ways, the invisible shield that stood between the wild and the world. But Kale's destiny took a darker turn. It began with betrayal, not by a stranger, but by someone he called brother. Ambition burned in the hearts of the Moonborn, and one among them, Varen, sought to claim the crown. He envied Kale's strength, his grace under the moon, and the love he carried for a human woman, a healer named Elysia. Elysia was unlike any other. She saw the beast and the man as one, never fearing the shift of his form or the glow in his eyes. Her kindness had softened him, and in her laughter, he found a peace he had never known. But love is a dangerous light, for it makes others see their own shadows too clearly. Varen spread whispers of treachery, turning the clans against Kale. He called him weak for loving a mortal, unfit to bear the Alpha King's mark. And when words failed, he turned to darker means. On the night of the blood moon, the brothers met beneath the sacred oak, one with a heart burdened by love, the other by hatred. Steel clashed, claws tore, and the air burned with fury. When dawn rose, only one remained standing. Kale had slain his brother, but at a cost too great. As Varen fell, he cursed Kale with his dying breath. You will guard forever what you love most, but you will never again touch it. You will walk as beast, not man. Protector, not beloved. Immortal, yet alone. And so, under the pale gaze of the moon, Kale's body broke and changed. His bones twisted, his skin became fur, and his voice was lost to the howl of eternity. The Alpha King, his father, saw what had been done and wept, for though his son still lived, he no longer belonged to either world. Banished from the Moonborn, bound by the curse, Kale became a legend. He wandered the centuries unseen, guarding villages, saving lives, appearing only in the moments between life and death, when souls teetered on the edge. The people began to call him the Mourning Wolf, the spirit that howled when the innocent were taken too soon. And so he remained, forgotten by time, trapped in the endless twilight between man and beast. Until the day a little girl's heart stopped. When Lila's final breath escaped her lips by the river, Kale heard it, not as a sound, but as a pull. The bond of protection, the ancient magic of the moonbow. RN still slept within his cursed soul. Her innocence called to him across the veil. For the first time in centuries, the ancient curse cracked, and the beast remembered the man he once was. He found her as the villagers carried her toward the church. He watched from the trees as her mother wept, and for a moment, his golden eyes flickered with memory, of Elysia's face, of love, of loss. Something inside him refused to let this story end the same way. When the coffin was sealed, he moved through the mist, following a force older than grief. His paw rested upon the lid, and his curse trembled. The power that had bound him broke open, letting the ancient moonlight flow through his veins once more. It was not resurrection, it was balance. The life he had lost returned through her. He gave what little of his soul remained. And when the child opened her eyes again, her heart beating anew, a part of Kale lived within her, the spark of the moonborn, the light of his centuries-long vigil. That is why her eyes glowed gold. That is why the forest answered her voice. But with the gift came a bond. From that day, their souls were tied, the girl who had returned from death and the beast who had refused to let her die. Her life and his existence became one thread, woven by fate and moonlight. He would always feel her heartbeat. And she, though too young to understand, would always know when he was near. In the nights that followed, the moon watched them both. Lila dreamed of a vast forest filled with silver light and ancient whispers. In her dreams, she walked beside a man she could never quite see, only his shadow, tall and strong, his hand warm in hers. She felt safe there, whole. And far away, in the darkness of the woods, the wolf stood beneath the same moon, eyes lifted toward it as if praying to a goddess who had long forgotten his name. He remembered Elysia's laughter. He remembered the curse. And now, he remembered the child, the one life that made his endless suffering mean something again. He did not yet know it, but his curse was beginning to break. Not through magic, not through blood, but through love, the same force that had damned him once, now daring to save him. The passing of seasons in the village came like slow waves, gentle, rhythmic, unhurried. Yet for those who paid attention, something had changed in their world since the day the child returned from the grave. It was subtle at first, the kind of change one feels before seeing, like the air before rain, or the quiet before dawn. Lila grew stronger with every sunrise. Her laughter returned, bright and crystalline, echoing down the lanes of the village like a melody that had once been lost. But beneath that joy, something new stirred, something older than her years, older even than the soil beneath her feet. Her eyes, golden and bright, reflected more than sunlight. They reflected memory, fragments of dreams that didn't belong to a child. She began to sense things before they happened, to know when someone was coming, when storms were near, when the river would rise. She could walk into the forest without fear, and no beast ever touched her. The villagers watched in awe, half fear and half reverence. They called her, the moon's child. At night, when the sky was clear and the moon painted the rooftops silver, Lila would leave her bed and walk quietly to the forest's edge. Her mother sometimes followed, silently, afraid yet unable to stop her. Lila would stand there, barefoot on the damp earth, her eyes fixed on the dark tree line as though listening to a voice only she could hear. And somewhere deep within the forest, the wolf would be watching. He did not always come close. Often he lingered in the shadows, his golden eyes glowing faintly through the underbrush. Sometimes, when the night was still enough, his breath misted through the fog, and Lila would smile, sensing his presence. Their bond was silent, wordless, but alive. He was her unseen guardian, moving with the quiet precision of a spirit that had waited lifetimes for its purpose. The villagers spoke of him in hushed tones now. They no longer called him monster or curse. They called him protector. Still, no one dared to enter the forest. Those who did returned with stories, of movement between the trees, of whispers in the dark, of eyes watching from places no man could reach. But there was no malice there, no hunger. The forest had changed since the day of the funeral. It felt alive now, aware, like something sacred had awakened beneath its roots. Lila was drawn to it more and more with each passing year. She would wander deeper than before, always guided by that faint echo in her heart, the same echo that once pulled a dying wolf to a child's coffin. One evening, as twilight melted into blue, she ventured farther than she ever had. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth. The forest seemed to breathe around her, and the golden light that filtered through the leaves shimmered with strange, ethereal beauty. She stopped by the river, the same river that had taken her life once. The water glowed faintly under the rising moon, and her reflection stared back at her. The same child's face, but with something ancient behind the eyes. The wolf emerged from the shadows. He was larger now, or perhaps it was the way the moonlight touched him, outlining every curve of muscle, every scar of age and battle. His fur gleamed silver at the edges, and his eyes glowed like molten suns. Lila did not move. She simply watched him, calm and unafraid. The wolf stepped closer until the river separated them. He bowed his head slightly, and for a moment, it seemed that the water between them stilled in reverence. Lila tilted her head, as if understanding something wordless, something vast. A breeze passed through the trees. The moonlight shimmered across the river, and for the briefest of moments, she saw him. Not as a wolf, but as a man. Tall, with eyes the color of light caught in amber. His hair dark as the forest night, his face carved with quiet sorrow and strength. His gaze held hers, soft and reverent, and though she could not hear his voice, she felt his words inside her, a whisper that resonated not in her ears but in her soul. "You are safe." Then, as suddenly as he appeared, the vision broke. The wolf stood there once more, silent, watching. Lila's breath trembled. She didn't cry or scream. She only smiled, a small, knowing smile that no one would understand but him. She turned away and walked back toward the village, her heart filled with warmth she couldn't explain. Behind her, the wolf watched until her small figure vanished into the light of the village lamps. Then he turned his gaze to the moon, a low sound escaping his chest, not a howl, but a sigh, centuries old. He remembered now what the curse had taken from him, his form, his voice, his touch. But not his heart. And through that child, through her life, her light, her laughter, his heart began to remember what it meant to be human. He followed her silently for many nights afterward, unseen yet ever present. When danger came, a falling branch, a straying wildcat, a sudden flood, he was there, warding it off with silent precision. When she cried, he would appear at the edge of the field, his eyes gleaming softly, as if reminding her she was never alone. Years passed. The girl grew. The village began to thrive again, harvests richer, sickness fading, winters softer. The people no longer feared the dark or the forest. They left offerings at the edge of the trees, bread, flowers, candles, small tokens for the guardian they could not see. But as blessings returned, so did curiosity. And curiosity, when touched by greed, always invites ruin. One night, a group of men from a distant town came to the village. Hunters, armed, rough, hungry for glory. They had heard stories of the silver beast, the great wolf said to haunt the forest. They did not come to worship. They came to kill. Lila sensed them before they even crossed the fields. The air grew cold that evening, thick with warning. The forest rustled restlessly, its silence uneasy. In her sleep, Lila's heart raced, a pulse of fear she could not name. And deep within the trees, the wolf stirred. His golden eyes opened, and a low growl rumbled through the earth, not of anger, but of Pr. Omise. He had been cursed to protect. And protect he would, no matter the cost. For the first time in centuries, the ancient blood of the Alpha stirred within him once more. The night would soon bear witness to it. The night came heavy and full of warning. The air hung thick, unmoving, as though the forest itself waited, listening. Clouds crawled over the moon, dimming her silver light to a ghostly shimmer, and the wind carried a scent that did not belong there. Smoke, iron, men. The hunters had arrived. They came from the northern towns, men hardened by cold and coin, driven by stories of monsters that walked on four legs beneath the full moon. They spoke of trophies and glory, of selling the hide of the silver guardian to noble lords who collected legends like gold. But what they did not understand was that they were not stepping into a forest. They were stepping into a living memory. The trees whispered to one another as the men entered, their boots sinking into the soft earth, their torches spitting light against the dark. Every sound was too loud, the crack of a branch, the hiss of flame, the clatter of metal. The wolves that lived deeper within the forest fell silent. The owls stopped their watch. The air became too still, too aware. And somewhere in the heart of it all, he stirred. The guardian awoke. Kale had not slept in years, not truly. His rest was a half-death between nights, a state of waiting, neither dream nor waking. But now the forest itself pulled at him, rousing his senses like a storm breaking through still water. He rose from the shadows of his den, his fur slick with dew, his eyes glowing faintly like coals beneath ash. He could feel them. The men. Their scent burned in his nose, fear masked by arrogance, courage poisoned by greed. He could sense their intent, the darkness that followed them. But more than that, he could feel her. Lila. Her heartbeat echoed faintly through the tether of their souls. She slept uneasily in her small bed, tossing beneath her blanket as though caught in a storm only she could feel. The bond between them pulsed with warning, her dreams bleeding with images not her own. She saw men with torches. She saw eyes of gold in the dark. She saw the forest weep. And in her dream, a voice whispered, not with words, but with memory, "Stay inside, child of light. The dark will move tonight." But fate does not heed warnings. By midnight, the hunters had reached the old stone circle, the remnants of what had once been a sacred place for the moonborn. They did not know what they trampled on. The stones glowed faintly under the moon, marking the border between the mortal and the forgotten. One of the men, tall and scarred, laughed as he drove his torch into the ground. "Here's where the beast hides," he muttered. "We'll smoke him out." The others followed, setting kindling, spreading flame. The fire caught quickly, crawling along the fallen leaves, climbing the underbrush. The forest screamed silently as sparks rose into the night. And then the air shifted. The wind died. The flames wavered. Every sound, every breath, every whisper was swallowed by a stillness so deep it seemed the world had stopped. The men froze, their eyes darting toward the shadows between the trees. Something moved there, something vast. From the darkness, two eyes opened, burning gold, unblinking. The first growl came low and distant, vibrating through the ground like thunder trapped beneath the soil. The hunters raised their weapons, but their hands trembled. The torches flickered, and the shadows stretched long and thin, wrapping around them like vines. Then the wolf stepped into the light. He was enormous, his silver-gray fur catching the fire's reflection like armor made of moonlight. Every line of his body spoke of power restrained, ancient and untamed. His eyes, those impossible eyes, burned with fury and sorrow in equal measure. The men whispered prayers they no longer remembered. The leader raised his crossbow and fired. The bolt never reached him. The wolf moved faster than sight, the air cracking with the force of his motion. The weapon shattered, and the man was thrown to the ground, the breath torn from his chest. But Kale did not kill him. He stood over him instead, his golden eyes burning inches from the man's face, an unspoken warning, a chance for mercy. Yet men rarely understand mercy when faced with gods. Another hunter lunged from behind, blade drawn. The wolf turned, catching the sword in his jaws, snapping it like glass. His growl deepened, ancient, resonant, a sound that carried the weight of centuries. The forest echoed it, the very ground humming with its power. The hunters fled. They ran through the trees, their torches dying one by one, swallowed by fog and fear. The wolf did not follow them. He stood at the edge of the sacred stones, watching as the flames receded. His breath came hard and heavy, his chest rising and falling like a storm breaking apart. But he was not unscathed. A single iron-tipped arrow had found its mark, lodged deep in his shoulder. Iron, the poison of the moonborn. His body trembled as he tore it free, black blood hissing as it touched the earth. He staggered, his vision blurring. The forest moaned softly around him, as though mourning. And in the distance, miles away, Lila awoke screaming. Her mother rushed to her side, but Lila's eyes were wide and glowing, her small hands clutching her chest as if something inside her burned. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not from fear but from knowing. "He's hurt," she whispered, her voice trembling, ancient. He's hurt. Her mother did not understand, but Lila did not wait for permission. She threw on her cloak and ran barefoot into the night, the wind whipping her hair, her breath clouding in the cold. The forest called to her, and though her body was small and fragile, something within her moved with certainty, guided by a bond stronger than blood. The wolf lay beneath the old oak, his vision fading, the moon fractured in his sight. His strength was leaving him, centuries of endurance unraveling with each heartbeat. He lifted his head weakly as footsteps approached. Through the fog, through the dim light of dying fire, came the child, no longer a child, but the soul he had saved. Her small hands reached for him, her tears falling warm against his fur. She whispered his name though she had never heard it. "Kale." The sound of it broke something in the air, an invisible chain snapping under the weight of recognition. The forest glowed faintly, and the moon seemed to draw nearer, her light wrapping them both in silver. The curse that had bound him trembled. Where her hands touched his fur, light spread, soft and golden. His breathing steadied. The poison slowed. The wound began to close, not by magic alone, but by the return of what he had lost, the connection, the purpose, the reason. The wolf lifted his head and met her gaze. In those golden eyes, she saw not the beast, but the man, the guardian, the warrior, the sorrow and the love of 1,000 forgotten moons. And for the first time since the curse had been cast, Kale felt something more powerful than pain. Hope. The forest sighed, the moon shone bright once more, and the night that had begun with fire ended with silence and peace. But in that peace, something ancient stirred again, something darker, watching from beyond the veil. The curse had not ended. It had only awakened. The forest had quieted, but the silence was not peace. It was the kind of silence that breathes, watching, waiting, almost alive. Smoke drifted through the trees like faded ghosts of fire, and beneath the ancient oak where the wolf had fallen, the air shimmered faintly with power. The child slept now, curled beside the silver-furred guardian, her small hand resting against his chest where his heart still beat, slow but steady. Her tears had dried, though streaks of them still marked her face. She had run through thorns, over roots, through the wild dark, driven not by thought but by something older, deeper, bound to him. Kale lay beside her, the pain in his shoulder dulled but not gone. The iron wound pulsed faintly, the venom whispering still, but the forest had begun to heal him. Roots and vines coiled gently around him, seeping strength into his veins, and the moonlight bathed him like a blessing. He should have been dead. But she had called his name, the name that no one had spoken for 100 years. The name that once carried weight among kings and gods. The name that had been buried beneath his curse, buried until a child's trembling voice shattered the seal. And with that name came memory. He remembered the war, the night of broken crowns, when the Moonborn and the Alphas tore kingdoms apart. He remembered the betrayal that had cursed his blood, the fire that had taken his mate, the blade that had pierced his heart and turned his soul into a beast of vengeance. He remembered the voice of the one who had cursed him. You will live until you remember what mercy feels like. Until your claws cradle instead of kill. Until the light you destroyed forgives you. For centuries, he had wandered, lost to rage. But tonight, a child's tears had reached where even moonlight could not. Now the forest whispered differently. The spirits that lived in the trees stirred, their faint glows like floating embers, circling the two beneath the oak. The guardian of the silver woods was awake again, and his bond with the child had become the heart of the forest itself. But not all who stirred were light. Deep beneath the roots, beneath the layers of earth and time, something ancient and cold opened its eyes. It had been bound there when Kale was cursed, a fragment of his darkness, torn from him but never destroyed. It had fed on bitterness, on regret, on the centuries of loneliness that had followed. And now that the light had returned, it hungered to destroy it. The air grew cold. The mist thickened. A shadow slithered through the undergrowth, shapeless yet alive. It whispered with 1,000 voices, all echoing the same truth, that light always draws darkness. It moved toward the clearing, toward the oak where the child and the wolf lay. But before it could reach them, something ancient stirred in the air, a barrier invisible yet powerful. The light that glowed faintly from the girl's small body flared, stopping the shadow mid-crawl. It hissed and recoiled, writhing in pain, and vanished back into the deeper dark. The balance held, for now. When dawn came, the forest awoke to quiet rain. Drops fell softly onto leaves, washing the soot from the night's fire, carrying away the scent of iron and fear. Birds began to sing again, timidly at first, then with growing courage, as if the very act of song could mend what had been broken. Lila stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. The first thing she saw was Silver. The great wolf beside her breathed slow and steady, his fur glistening with dew. She reached out, brushing his muzzle with her fingers. You're real, she whispered. The wolf's eyes opened, gold and ancient, deep as 1,000 forgotten suns. For a moment, neither moved. Child and guardian simply watch. Head each other, the air between them thick with an understanding too vast for words. Then, slowly, the wolf rose to his feet. His wound was gone. His strength had returned. Yet his form shimmered faintly, as though the moonlight clung to him, unwilling to let go. He looked down at her, then turned his gaze toward the forest edge. Something called to him. Beyond the trees, past the river that marked the border of the human lands, lay the ruins of his kingdom, the old moon throne, where he had once ruled as Alpha King before the curse. His duty had been to protect, but instead he had brought ruin. Now, fate had returned him a second chance, through the child who had unknowingly freed him. He stepped forward, then paused. Lila had risen too, her small hands clutching the edges of her cloak. Her eyes, so innocent, yet glowing faintly with moonlight, met his. "Don't go," she said softly. The wolf hesitated. The words struck something deep within him. He had lived through centuries without belonging. But now, a single voice asking him to stay felt like a promise he could not break. He lowered his head, pressing his muzzle gently against her shoulder. She smiled, and though she did not understand why, tears filled her eyes again, not of sadness, but of recognition. The bond was complete. From that day, the stories began. The tale of the child and the guardian wolf who walked beside her through forest and fire, through night and moonlight. Together they mended what centuries had torn apart. Together they awakened the sleeping magic of the Silver Woods. But darkness does not sleep for long. Far beyond the river, in the shadows of ruined stone, the ancient darkness that had fled now gathered its strength. It took form, not a beast, not a man, but something between. Eyes like burning coal, claws that dripped with shadow. It spoke the name that had cursed Kale once before, its voice echoing through the wind like a prophecy reborn. "Alpha of the Silver Woods, your soul is mine still." The forest trembled, unaware that a storm greater than fire was coming. And somewhere deep inside Kale's heart, the memory of the curse shivered again, reminding him that redemption always comes with a price. The wolf lifted his head to the morning sky, his golden eyes catching the light of dawn. Lila stood beside him, her hand resting on his fur, her gaze unafraid. Together they watched the sun rise through the mist, the first day of their shared fate. The bond between them pulsed faintly, and for that fleeting moment, the world seemed right again. The world changed that night, though the stars gave no sign. The Silver Woods slept beneath a veil of mist, soft and quiet, as though the forest itself were holding its breath. The trees whispered low hymns to the wind, their roots humming with an energy older than memory. Yet beneath that sacred calm, something was stirring, a pulse of darkness, slow but steady, creeping through the unseen veins of the earth. Lila felt it before anyone else. It began as a dream. She stood on a plain of silver light, barefoot, the moon above her enormous and too bright. The air shimmered with cold. And in the distance, she saw a figure, tall, cloaked in smoke and shadow, with eyes like molten ash. When he spoke, his voice carried through the dream like thunder underwater. "You are her light. You are his chain. The Alpha will break again." She tried to run, but the ground melted into black water beneath her feet. The shadow reached out a hand, long fingers stretching like smoke, and whispered her name. "Lila." She woke with a gasp. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, and the wolf lay nearby, his golden eyes glowing faintly in the dark. For a long moment, the two simply watched each other, the child breathing fast, the guardian still as stone. Then he rose, padding silently to her side, lowering his head until his nose brushed her wrist. His presence alone steadied her heartbeat. Outside, rain had begun to fall again. It came down hard, drumming against the roof like warning drums. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of iron, faint but unmistakable. The hunters had not all died. Some had fled that night, carrying tales of the silver beast to towns beyond the river. They had spoken of eyes like suns and teeth like lightning. Of a cursed forest ruled by something divine and monstrous. The story had grown in their telling, and with each retelling, greed awoke in the hearts of men who thought they could capture legend and turn it to gold. Now, an army was coming. Not with torches, but with banners. Not peasants, but soldiers, led by nobles who believed the old myths could be harnessed. Among them walked priests of the Sun Order, those who sought to purge the last remnants of moon magic from the realm. They spoke of light, but they carried fire in chains. And far beneath their marching feet, the thing that had haunted Kale's curse began to stir. It was drawn to the fear they carried, to the violence in their intent. It fed on their rage and their righteousness, twisting it until their souls no longer knew mercy. The cursed moon, his oldest enemy, his other half, was waking. In the forest, Kale felt it like a blade behind the ribs. He lifted his head, ears twitching, eyes glowing faintly as the first low growl escaped his throat. The power of his curse was bound to the moon, and when the cursed light stirred, so too did the beast within him. His fur bristled, his breath turned sharp, and the memory of blood filled his mind, the scent, the sound, the madness. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe. No, not again. He had sworn never to let that darkness rise again. But the curse was old, and the blood that carried it older still. His kind had been forged from balance, light and shadow, mercy and wrath, and without the moon's grace, he was nothing but the weapon he'd once been. He turned his gaze toward the child, sleeping again, unaware of the storm gathering beyond the trees. For her sake, he would endure. For her, he would fight the thing that lived in his own heart. Because in her presence, the curse had cracked. And through that crack, light had entered. The next morning came slow and cold. The mist hung low, curling between the trunks like ghostly breath. Kale stood at the edge of the glade, watching the tree line, every sense sharpened. The forest had grown restless. The animals had gone silent. Even the wind refused to pass through the branches. And then he heard it, the faintest echo of metal against stone. Marching, he growled softly. Lila emerged from the cabin, rubbing her eyes, wrapped in a cloak too large for her small frame. Her hair was tangled, her face pale from sleepless dreams. But when she looked up at the wolf, she saw the tension in his body, the way his muscles coiled like wire, the way his gaze cut through the mist. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't move, didn't answer. But she felt it through their bond, the surge of unease, the shadow of coming danger. She stepped closer, placing a hand on his neck. "We'll be safe," she said quietly, though she didn't know why she believed it. "You'll keep us safe." For the first time in his endless life, the wolf wished he could speak. He wanted to tell her that he would die before harm came to her. That she was the reason he'd survived when the curse should have ended him centuries ago. But all he could do was nudge her hand gently with his muzzle, and that was enough. By midday, the sound of marching grew clearer. Shadows moved through the mist, dark figures carrying banners and spears, the insignia of the Sun Order gleaming faintly on their armor. At their front rode a man cloaked in crimson, his eyes hidden behind a visor of gold. The priests halted at the edge of the forest. The crimson leader raised his hand, his voice ringing through the clearing. "By the decree of the Sun Throne, we command the beast of this forest to reveal itself. The curse shall be broken. The child it protects shall be delivered to the Order." The forest did not answer. And then the trees began to move. Not with wind, but with will. The roots shuddered, tearing through soil, twisting like serpents. The mist thickened, curling into the shape of wolves, dozens, hundreds, ghostly forms born of moonlight and memory. Their eyes glowed gold and white and silver, their howls rising as one, a chorus that shattered the soldiers' courage. At the center of it stood Kale. He stepped forward from the shadows, his massive frame glowing with faint lunar light. His eyes locked on the man in crimson, and in that gaze lived all the wrath of kings long dead. The soldiers raised their weapons. And for the first time in a century, the Alpha King bared his fangs. The forest erupted. The air filled with motion, flashes of silver and shadow, the sound of claws against steel, roars that shook the ground. The priests called to their sun, summoning fire from their palms, hurling it into the mist. Flames met moonlight, light met darkness, and the world trembled at their collision. Lila watched from the cabin's doorway, tears blurring her sight. She wanted to run to him, to scream for the fighting to stop, but the bond between them told her this was not the moment for fear. It told her to wait. To trust. Because she could feel it, through the pain and the fury, through the roar of battle, Kale's heart still burned for her. His light, his mercy, his promise. The red moon hung over the silver woods like a bleeding crown. Its light poured through the mist, staining the world in shades of crimson and silver, where every shadow moved like a living thing and every breath trembled with magic. The night had become a battlefield of ancient wills. At its heart stood Kale, the wolf of legend, the fallen Alpha King, his body a thing of strength and sorrow. His fur shimmered between silver and shadow, his eyes glowing gold against the blood-red light. Around him, the ghostly wolves, echoes of those he had once ruled, moved like spirits reborn, their forms flickering in and out of sight. Opposite them, the men of the Sun Order advanced through the burning mist. Their armor gleamed dully beneath the red glow, their faces hidden behind masks of sanctity. They chanted as they marched, voices rising in a ritual rhythm that made the air hum and crackle. Their priests lifted staffs wrapped in fire and sigils, calling on their god of light to purge the forest of its demon king. But they did not understand. They saw monsters where mercy lived. They sought to destroy what they could not comprehend. The first clash came sudden and violent. Steel met fang. Fire met moonlight. The ground shook under the fury of the two forces colliding. The wolves darted like shadows, moving faster than arrows, tearing through ranks of men whose armor burned bright but hearts quaked with fear. The forest itself seemed alive, its branches striking down like spears, roots rising to crush and coil. Kale moved through the chaos like a storm given form, swift, silent, unstoppable. Each movement carried centuries of pain and purpose. His claws struck down fire-bearers, his fangs shattered shields of light. But even as he fought, the red moon's curse began to sink into his veins. It called to the part of him that was darkness. The part he had buried for the child's sake. It whispered his old name, the one he had abandoned when he chose protection over power. It told him that mercy was weakness, that love was the weapon that would undo him again. And slowly, the light in his eyes began to change. The gold deepened to amber. The calm gave way to fury. His breath came harsher. The ground beneath his paws scorched with each step. The soldiers saw it, saw the shift, and for a moment, they believed their prophecy was true. That the beast was nothing but a demon after all. But far from the battle, within the safety of the cabin, Lila felt it too. The bond between them flared with pain, like fire beneath her skin. She could feel his rage, his fear, the chains of his curse tightening once more. Tears filled her eyes as she stumbled out into the rain, her feet bare, her small hands clutching the edge of her cloak. The forest whispered warnings, but she didn't stop. Kale, she cried, her voice trembling through the storm. The wolves paused, their eyes turning toward her, sensing the light that lived in her soul. Even the forest seemed to bend to her will, branches parting, mist curling back, as if the earth itself made way for its little queen. She ran through the chaos, her white dress streaked with mud and ash, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. And when she reached the clearing, the sight before her stole her breath. Kale stood in the center, surrounded by fire and blood. His form had grown, taller, darker, half wolf, half man, a creature caught between the curse and the redemption he'd earned. His growl was no longer a sound but an earthquake, his every breath shaking the air. Kale, she screamed again, and this time her voice broke the barrier between man and beast. He turned. For a moment, he did not see her. He saw only red, the soldiers, the flames, the hatred. But then her voice reached deeper, cutting through the fog of rage. He blinked, and in her trembling figure, he saw what the curse had tried to make him forget. Love. The bond between them burned bright, a golden thread glowing in the air, visible even to the priests who halted mid-strike. The power that pulsed between them was not born of darkness, but of balance, the sacred unity the gods themselves had broken ages ago. Kale stepped back, fighting the curse clawing at his soul. The shadow of the cursed moon rose behind him, taking form, a massive phantom wolf of smoke and flame, its eyes black voids. It was his other self, the monster born of guilt and wrath, the one that had slaughtered armies and shattered kingdoms. It moved when he moved, breathed when he breathed, a dark reflection chained to his being. Lila took another step forward, her voice shaking. Stop fighting it, you don't need to. You're not him anymore. The shadow roared, a sound like the breaking of the world. Kale fell to his knees, claws digging into the earth as the darkness tried to devour him from within. His breath came in gasps, his body convulsing as light and shadow warred across his skin. The priests, realizing the danger, raised their staffs again. Destroy the child, one shouted. She is the source of the corruption. Flames gathered in their palms. But before the fire could reach her, Kale moved. He surged forward, the light in his eyes burning pure gold once more. His body blurred with speed beyond mortal sight, and in a single motion, he stood between her and the storm of fire. The flames struck him full force. The explosion shattered the clearing, sending ash and sparks into the air. When the smoke cleared, the soldiers saw him still standing, his body alight with fire, his fur turned silver white, his form neither man nor beast but something divine. The cursed shadow behind him screamed, splitting into fragments of black smoke. The red moon flickered, its glow trembling, faltering. Kale turned his gaze upward, his voice rising like thunder. No more. He leapt, breaking through the crimson light that bound the sky. His roar echoed across the land, reaching every creature, every tree, every soul that had once called him Alpha. The red light shattered, replaced by the true silver of the moon, pure, bright, healing. The soldiers dropped their weapons. Their fire died. The shadow dissolved into ash that the wind carried away. When the light faded, Kale fell. Lila ran to him, her heart breaking as she knelt beside his fallen body. His form had changed, no longer the monstrous wolf, but a man with silver hair, his eyes half open, his breathing shallow. Kale, she whispered, pressing her hand to his chest. His hand, large and scarred, lifted weakly to touch her cheek. You called me back, he murmured. You made me remember what I was meant to protect. Tears streamed down her face. Don't leave me, please. He smiled faintly, not the smile of a beast, but of a king who had found peace. I'm not leaving. The forest still needs a guardian. And now, it has you. His golden eyes closed as the moon shone bright overhead, no longer cursed, but whole. Lila clutched his hand, weeping silently as the wolves gathered around her, their ghostly forms bowing low. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the sound of his voice, soft and eternal. The Alpha protects. Always. And in that moment, as moonlight wrapped around them like silk, the silver woods began to bloom again, flowers rising through ash, the scent of new life spreading on the wind. The night after the red moon shattered was unlike any other. The air smelled of rain and ash, yet underneath it lingered the faint sweetness of life returning, the first breath of a world reborn. The silver woods stood silent at dawn. The mist had lifted, revealing the endless stretch of trees glimmering with dew and starlight. The crimson curse that had once painted the forest in blood had vanished, replaced by a pale gold glow that touched every leaf and stone. And at the heart of it all, beneath the towering silver oaks, a girl knelt beside the fallen Alpha King. Lila's fingers trembled as they brushed against Kale's cheek, tracing the faint smile that still lingered on his lips. He looked peaceful, as if asleep, his body resting on a bed of moss and flowers that bloomed where his blood had fallen. The wolves, both spirit and flesh, surrounded her in silent vigil. None dared to move. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. When the first ray of sunlight pierced the canopy, it landed upon Kale's chest, right over his heart. The light shimmered, and for a moment, Lila thought she saw it pulse, one faint beat, like a whisper of life refusing to die. Her heart leapt. Kale? No answer. Only the rustle of leaves, the distant call of morning birds. Tears filled her eyes again, and she bowed her head, her voice breaking in the quiet. You kept your promise. You protected us all. But, who will protect you now? The words hung heavy in the air. And then, something strange began to happen. The light over his chest grew brighter, threads of silver radiating outward like roots sinking into the earth, like veins connecting him to the forest itself. The wolves lifted their heads, ears twitching, as a low hum filled the ground beneath them. The bond that had once tied Kale's soul to the moon was not gone, it had changed. He had broken the curse, yes, but in doing so, he had given part of himself to the forest. His spirit, his power, his essence, they were no longer confined to flesh and blood. They had become one with the silver woods. Lila felt it then, a warmth spreading through her chest, up her throat, to her fingertips. It was as though his heartbeat had merged with hers, the echo of his voice resonating within her soul. The Alpha protects. Always. Her tears turned to light, drops of gold falling onto his skin, seeping into him like dawn into shadow. The moment they touched, the ground trembled softly. The flowers surrounding him began to glow, faint, gentle, alive. And then she heard it, the whisper of countless voices in the wind. They were not human, nor entirely spirit. They were the echoes of every life the forest had ever held, wolves, stags, birds, even the trees themselves. They whispered her name, not as Lila, the orphaned child who had once been lost in the woods, but as something new. Lunara. The name wrapped around her like a crown. It was the name the forest gave to its chosen, the keeper of balance, the bridge between moon and sun, between beast and man. The role once held by Kale. She rose slowly, her eyes glowing faint gold, her hair lifting as though stirred by unseen winds. The wolves bowed their heads to her, their eyes reflecting the same light. And when she looked upon the horizon, she saw what he had seen, a world still broken, still learning to heal. Villages scarred by war, rivers tainted by greed, men who feared the magic of the woods and the beasts who feared men in return. She understood then what Kale's final words had meant. The forest had its guardian now, her. Lila, or Lunara, as she was now known, placed a hand over Kale's chest one last time. Her voice was steady, though her heart trembled. I'll watch over them, over all of it. I'll make sure what you fought for never fades. The light flared once more, bright, blinding, pure, and when it faded, Kale's body was gone. In its place lay a single silver flower, its petals soft as moonlight, its stem pulsing faintly with golden veins. Lunara lifted it gently, holding it close to her heart. The moment she did, she felt a pulse of warmth, a heartbeat not her own. It was him, not lost, but within. The wolves howled as the first full light of morning broke across the land, their voices rising in harmony, not of mourning, but of rebirth. From that day onward, the forest was never the same. The silver woods became a sanctuary again. The rivers cleared. The air grew sweet. The trees whispered secrets to those who listened with respect, and the beasts no longer feared the footsteps of kind men. Those who entered with greed, however, never returned, for the guardian saw through hearts as easily as she saw through lies. The villagers spoke of her in hushed tones. Some called her the Lady of Light and Shadow. Others, the moon's heir. But most knew her by the name whispered on the wind, Lunara, child of the Alpha. She built her home deep within the heart of the woods, in the place where Kale had fallen. A sanctuary of stone and vine, wrapped in silver moss and blooming flowers. At its center stood the great oak, the spirit tree, whose roots glowed softly at night, pulsing like the heartbeat of the world. Every evening, she would sit beneath it, holding the silver flower, and speak softly to the wind. Kale, she would whisper, the forest still breathes. The wolves still run. The sun and moon rise in peace. You did it. We did it. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the wind shifted and the moonlight turned gold, she would hear his voice, faint, loving, eternal. I told you, little one, the Alpha protects. Always. The years passed, but Lunara did not age as humans do. The bond she carried kept her spirit young, her strength unbroken. Generations came and went, yet the forest remained as it had always been, timeless, sacred, alive. Children born near its borders would sometimes wake in the night, claiming to have heard a silver wolf watching over them. Hunters lost in its shadows would find themselves led out by a golden-eyed woman wrapped in moonlight. And those who dared harm the forest never left its depths again. For the Alpha still watched, through her eyes, through her heart, through the trees that whispered his name. But destiny is a circle, not a line. And on the 1000th year after the red moon's fall, when the balance between man and magic began to waver again, a new prophecy was born, one that spoke of a child with the Alpha's light and the Lady's soul. A child who would face a choice greater than either of them had before. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. Kings claimed crowns forged in greed, and kingdoms burned under their own ambition. Yet through every storm and silence, the silver woods endured, timeless, sacred, and forever under the watch of the one who once saved it. The villagers still told the tale of the silver wolf who halted a child's funeral, and of the Alpha King whose love for humanity outlived his own heartbeat. Children grew up whispering her name, Lunara, the Lady of Light and Shadow, and mothers still warned their sons never to cut the old trees, for the forest remembers. But memory, like moonlight, does not fade, it only waits. And one night, under a rare lunar eclipse when the moon burned gold instead of silver, the forest stirred again. The spirit tree, once calm and radiant, began to tremble. Its roots glowed brighter than ever, lighting up the woods like rivers of molten sunlight. The wolves gathered in silence around its base, their fur shimmering like liquid light. Even the wind stilled, as though nature itself was holding its breath for something sacred. From her sanctuary at the forest's heart, Lunara opened her eyes. She had been dreaming, the same dream she'd had every 100 years, the sound of a heartbeat deep within the roots, calling to her, slow and steady. But this time, it was louder, stronger, nearer. She rose from her resting place, her golden eyes glowing softly, and stepped barefoot into the light of the eclipse. Her silver hair streamed behind her like the tail of a comet. The wolves followed silently. Each step she took awakened the forest, flowers blooming in her wake, branches bowing as though greeting their queen. When she reached the spirit tree, she stopped. A pulse ran through the earth beneath her feet. The light of the roots flickered once, twice, and then a sound like a deep exhale echoed through the woods. From the base of the great tree, the earth split open softly, not with destruction, but with rebirth. From that golden rift rose a figure. At first, he was only light, pure, radiant, and ancient. But then the light condensed, forming shape and shadow. Shoulders, a chest that rose with the slow breath of life. A heartbeat that echoed through every living creature in the forest. And when the glow finally faded, she saw him. Kale. The Alpha King stood before her, not as a ghost or memory, but as he once was, strong, proud, his eyes a storm of silver and dusk. His presence filled the clearing like thunder wrapped in sunlight. For a long moment, neither moved. The centuries that separated them fell away like dust. The world seemed to hold still, balanced on the fragile edge of time. Lunara's lips parted, but no words came. She didn't need them. The forest itself spoke for her, the whisper of leaves, the howl of wolves, the song of wind through branches. Kale stepped forward, the ground glowing faintly beneath his bare feet. His gaze softened as it met hers. He remembered everything. Every lifetime she had guarded the forest, every tear she had shed at the roots of his resting place, every whisper she had sent into the wind. He had heard it all. He had lived it all, through her. The spirit tree pulsed again, its roots curling protectively around them both, as though blessing their reunion. He reached out. She did the same. And when their hands touched, light burst outward, not harsh, not blinding, but soft and endless, spreading like dawn through shadow. The wolves howled as the light touched them, transforming their silver pelts into pure starlight. The trees shimmered with dew that glowed gold and blue, and for the first time in an age, the moon and sun shared the same sky. When the light faded, they stood hand in hand, whole again, Alpha and Guardian, united beyond death, beyond curse, beyond time. Kale spoke, his voice the low rumble of thunder meeting wind. Not words, but promise. The Alpha protects. Always. Lunara smiled, tears glittering on her lashes. And then she whispered back through the bond that tied their souls. And the forest remembers. From that day on, the Silver Woods became a place not of mystery, but of balance. No war, no greed, no fear ever crossed its borders again. The beasts lived alongside men. The rivers sang with light. And at its center stood the temple of moon and sun, where the spirit tree still thrived, glowing eternally, its roots pulsing with the heartbeat of two souls who had loved beyond the confines of flesh. Villagers who entered its heart sometimes claimed to see two figures walking among the trees at twilight, a man with silver eyes and a woman crowned in gold light, their laughter blending with the rustle of leaves. They said that when storms raged, you could hear their wolves howling at the wind, protecting the forest and its children from harm. And on nights when the moon turned gold, the entire forest would glow, a gentle, living reminder that love, when pure, becomes part of the world it protects. Lunara and Kale were never seen in the mortal world again, but their story never ended. It lived in the roots, in the rivers, in the hearts of all who still believed in magic. Because every generation, when a child was born with golden eyes or a silver birthmark in the shape of a crescent moon, the elders would whisper, "The blood of the Alpha and the Lady still runs. The guardians still walk among us." And somewhere, in the quiet between night and dawn, a silver wolf would be seen standing on a hill, watching the horizon, its eyes burning with both sunlight and moonlight. It would raise its head to the heavens and howl, a sound both mournful and triumphant, filled with ancient love. The forest would echo back. And for a moment, the whole world would remember that a wolf once stopped a funeral, that love once defied death, that two souls once chose each other, and through that choice, saved everything. The silver woods would never fade, because love, in its truest form, is immortal.